Released on March 24, 2005 for the PSP in North America, Twisted Metal Head-On feels a lot like the first two games in terms of the overall vibe. It's not as dark as Twisted Metal Black, or as vibrant as Small Brawl, but it definitely has some edge, and its mood really fits with the series. Due to this game's similarities to Singletrac's Twisted Metals, it's often considered the true successor to Twisted Metal 2, as some fans weren't too fond of the way Twisted Metal was portrayed in the third and fourth games. So without further ado, let's slam right into the madness and give Twisted Metal Head-On a deeper look. This game's combat engine is a lot like Twisted Metal Black's, and I'm pretty sure it's because they both run on the same engine. Not to mention, a lot of the new features from Black are back as well, including, but not limited to, hidden unlockables, endurance mode, and being able to choose between two levels ever so often. However, some of the new weapons from Black are missing, such as the satellite missile. Like the first game, the player's machine guns can overheat again, and while I did complain about this in my review of Twisted Metal 1, it's acceptable in this game, as they take longer to overheat, and they seem to do more damage, so the trade-off feels just right. Whenever a player destroys an opponent, they'll sometimes be able to pick up a green triangle, which will usually grant an upgrade to one of the many weapons they can use, increase their amount of health, upgrade their turbo, or give certain weapons. These upgrades will reset whenever the player dies though. As I mentioned, the hidden unlockables are back, but players are going to have to do more than just shoot something or find a secret area. In this game, players will have to find a hidden portal in the map, then complete some sort of challenge in order to unlock a secret character or level. If the player fails the challenge, they'll simply be placed back to where they were before they entered the portal. The player can also pick up weapons and turbo in these challenges, and if they win, the things they picked up during the challenge will be added to their inventory when they get back to the tournament. Not every challenge unlocks a character or level, sometimes it's just an upgrade or more weapons. Because the PSP doesn't have L2 or R2, the control scheme had to be changed a bit to accommodate for the missing buttons. Triangle changes the equipped weapon instead of turbo, and L1 and R1 fire the machine guns and weapons instead of going through the player's inventory. Speaking of the PSP's limitations, there can only be 5 enemies spawned in at any given time. Luckily, Incognito took this into consideration when making these levels, so despite the fact most of these maps are large, it doesn't take forever to beat levels. That's about it for the tournament. It's very much like Black's tournament mode, with a few new things added in. Now, onto the challenge mode. Players can pick multiple of the same opponent in challenge mode now. They can also pick the same character that they're playing as to battle against. There's also specific levels in challenge mode known as deathmatch levels, which are condensed versions of those maps to increase the chaos and mayhem between the contestants. Sometimes the map layout is completely changed, or larger parts of the map are blocked off to force players into battling it out in the small, cluttered areas. And last but not least, the endurance mode and multiplayer mode are the exact same as previous Twisted Metals. Defeat as many enemies as you can in one life in endurance mode, and co-op and competitive modes for multiplayer. The only thing that's missing is there's no unlockables from participating in endurance mode, and last man standing from Black is absent, but other than that, there's nothing new. Head-On looks as if Twisted Metal Black and the first two games mixed. So in essence, the same look and textures of Black, but the colors and aesthetic of the first two games. For a PSP game, the graphics are pretty much what one would expect, close to the PS2's graphical power, but lacking in some areas. If you notice the graphics are a bit different now, it's because I'm showing the PSP version, where most of the footage before was on the PS2 version, which we'll get into later. There are two differences I've noticed between the versions in terms of visuals. One, the HUD in the PSP version is larger. This makes sense considering the small screen of the PSP. The HUD had to take up a decent portion of the screen if the player were to understand their weapon stash, how many enemies are left, and other important information. The only other thing is that the PSP version runs at 30 frames per second, and the PS2 version runs at 60 frames per second. Graphical capabilities aside, let's talk about the levels. The levels in this game are similar to Black, fixed spaces with plenty of areas to explore, but there is some tight sections where contestants will build up lots of tension. And just like all the other Twisted Metal games, let's go over all the levels. Big Blue Stadium, a huge stadium that acts as an ATV track, baseball field, and concert venue. Things will get real hectic on the field, so using the bleachers in the small indoor sections would be wise when the situation gets too tense. Los Angeles, a destroyed highway mixed with movie studios, warehouses, sewers, and a power plant access this game's version of the City of Angels. Go underground for shelter and weapons, and there's a portal that'll teleport players to the LA Wood sign, which is the famous Hollywood sign, but it says LA Wood instead. Paris, the City of Love? Yeah, right. Paris is now a place where contestants will cause some mayhem around its streets and fancy properties. And just like Twisted Metal 2, players can destroy the Eiffel Tower with a remote bomb and explore the rooftops. Egypt, a barren battlefield with ancient structures scattered about. Players can go inside the pyramid in the middle of the map, along with a hidden section that resides near the burrow in the back of the map. Rome. Next up, the contestants find themselves at the ruins of the Roman Colosseum. Battle it out in the arena, find the Colosseum for goodies, or venture to the sides of the map to take a break from the action. Russia. With it violently snowing, players will have to take into account that some of the ground is going to be icy and be careful with their driving. It's a pretty big map, there's plenty of big areas, small spaces, and some buildings can be entered. Greece, a very open battlefield where players can roam around the grasslands, towns, or explore the ship in the middle of the map. Everything in this map connects. Getting from one area to another doesn't feel like a hassle. Monaco. The streets of this fancy city access the battlefield for a Twisted Metal contest and a racing competition. Players can destroy the passing-by racers for some weapons. Frequent use of the handle brake is suggested, as there's plenty of sharp corners and turns that players will have to navigate around. Tokyo. Japan's capital provides for an appropriate area for the final battles of Twisted Metal. Drive along the highway to find some opponents, or sleaze around the buildings for cover and to sneak up on others. Tokyo rooftops. Thought things were chaotic on the ground? Let's up the ante by going up a few hundred feet. Not only will players have to deal with controlling their vehicle well in order not to fall off, but they'll also have to destroy some of the infrastructure in order to go to other buildings and fight enemies. The levels in this game are really fun and explorable, and that's what makes them great. They have great flow, there's many ways to obtain weapons, and they work well with the limitation of only having 5 other enemies. Speaking of enemies, let's get on to the characters. Head-On has 3 new characters, all of which are either bosses or sub-bosses. Every other vehicle has appeared in a Twisted Metal game. Some of the drivers for these vehicles were changed though, as to not just blatantly copy and paste the characters from the first 2 games. This was also done to make sure the endings for these characters felt new, and prevent duplicate wishes. Of course, some of the drivers from the first 2 games are back, to either further fulfill their wish from Calypso by being specific with their words, that way they don't get screwed over, or get revenge on them for being meticulous with their words. And not all of them have to be alive. Simon Whittlebone and Krista Sparks come back from the dead as ghosts to try and win the Twisted Metal contest. The new designs for the old characters are pretty nice. They make sense with the vehicle of choice, and their personality aligns with what they wish for. Alright, let's go back to the new characters and analyze them. Cousin Eddie, a very stereotypical take on Southern Americans. Cousin Eddie drives a DIY RV, equipped with a manable machine gun on top and spikes on the front. He's rather unintelligent and didn't even know he was competing in a competition, but if he does win, he wishes for a brand spanking new RV, because he loves shiny things. ATV. Before the player fights Cousin Eddie, multiple guys on ATVs have to be taken out before they can fight the big man. ATV as a single character is driven by Gene Ruddish, and just like Cousin Eddie, he's not so smart and lacks proper hygiene. He is, however, a ladies' man that will ask Calypso to make him the most desired man on Earth if he wins. Tower Tooth. 2 huge axles act as the wheels of this massive structure, while the top acts as the brain of the group. Tower Tooth is the final boss, and players must destroy both the upper and lower parts in order to kill him. Tower Tooth is playable in the challenge mode, but only in one level. The new characters feel kinda underwhelming if you ask me. Two of these characters are hillbillies from the south, and the other one, while pretty cool design, is limited to a final boss battle and a single level in the challenge mode. Not to mention, they're all boss characters, so if one wants to play as the new additions, they'll have to beat them first. Before I move on, I just want to mention Darktooth real quick. Darktooth in Twisted Metal 2 was pretty much just an Omega-sized Sweet Tooth with a ridiculous special move. In this game, Darktooth is a larger version of the ice cream truck, but it now comes with a mouth to crunch enemies, and the cloud on top is a lot more menacing. It also shoots napalm ice cream cones instead of regular bullets for the machine guns. Just thought I'd bring him up because, while he's not new, this new version of the vehicle is just so badass, and also important to the story, but we'll get into that later. Okay, now let's move on to the menus. The menus in this game are pretty simple. They're just options placed in front of a green portal whirlwind thing. And just like Twisted Metal 2, the vehicles sit on top of the world and spin around. The character portraits in this game make the smallest of movements, and players don't have to go to a different screen in order to see the character's stats or description, as the specifications of the vehicles are already displayed, and a simple press of square will bring up the character's background. Let's move on to the cutscenes. This game has 4 mini cutscenes for the bosses, just to add some thrill, or possible fear that is the impending doom of having to fight them. Short, but sweet. The endings of this game follow the formula of the second game's endings pretty closely. Comic book-like art style, the animation is very limited, the characters don't move too much, a lot of the emotion and feeling is done through the voice acting, and they're fairly clever. Well, speaking of the endings, there seems to be a bit of a story going on in this game too. In Twisted Metal Black, it was hinted at that the entire game takes place in Sweet Tooth's head. Everything was made up. This could be the case with this game too. Roadkill and Sweet Tooth share the same last name, and their ending suggests they're actually the same person, and that Marcus Kane is living with a delusion. Notice that both final bosses are beefed up versions of Sweet Tooth. Why would another contestant steal Kane's card design? Not to mention, the head on Tower Tooth seems to be its own kind of monster. Even after it's defeated, it groans and shuts its eyes. So, what does it mean? Well, I can see it as 2 different things. If this is following the story of Twisted Metal Black, maybe Sweet Tooth is slowly coming to terms with the fact he's living in his own world, as not everything is as dark and gloomy as it was in the last game. Furthermore, he's starting to see himself as just a regular person, that regular person being Marcus Kane, as shown through both characters' endings, and Darktooth's ending. The destruction of Darktooth and Tower Tooth in the tournament mode could symbolize that Sweet Tooth is breaking down his persona. However, the Darktooth ending seems to suggest that, while Sweet Tooth can see the truth and accept it, it doesn't mean he wants to leave his delusion, and will maybe live the rest of his life as a killer clown. A second theory I have is Sweet Tooth, / Marcus Kane, has multiple personality disorder, and the different vibes of the games are how he feels about the world according to which personality he currently adapts. For example, one of Sweet Tooth's personalities views the world as a dark place, with no redemption, and the sun barely shines, reflective of Twisted Metal Black's art style and vibe, while another one of his personalities sees the Twisted Metal contest as some sort of sick joke that ruins the lives of many people, but ultimately, they're still good in the world, indicated by the color in many of the levels, and people like Outlaw exist, reflective of the first 2 games in Head On. Or perhaps I'm reaching with both these theories and neither are correct. Oh well, it's fun to theorize and use what's in the games to try and put together a story. If Incognito wanted to give us a complete picture, why would they be so vague with everything?
Who are you? Oh, come on. Don't be naive. Don't you drive Sweet Tooth? I'm a little bit more than that. I'm you moron. I don't know.
Twisted Metal Head On soundtrack is like a fusion of the music from Singletrac's and Incognito's Twisted Metal games. Each level has a song that's more atmospheric and immerses player in the level, and a rock song that's more energetic that'll rile players up to cause some destruction. The atmospheric tracks are either referred to as the level name followed either by orchestra or electric, as the file name seems to suggest, and the hype songs are referred to as the level name followed by rock. From what I know, the orchestra/electric songs play first, then after they end, the rock version of the song plays. It's a bit weird if you ask me. It's nice to have variety in the music, but I think the rock version of the song should start first to pump players up into destroying their enemies, and then the ambience track should play, because by that time, players will start to strategize and think about their attacks, rather than act aggressively towards their competition. Not to mention, since the levels only take a few minutes to complete, the rock version is rarely played, because most players are done with that level before the ambience track even finishes. Anyways, the only level that deviates a bit from this pattern is Big Blue Stadium, which will play disaster proof by the band level. It's the only licensed song in this game, and fits quite well with the pumped up aggression of Twisted Metal if you ask me. Otherwise, the Big Blue Stadium does have its own ambience and battle track. The sound effects are pretty standard for a Twisted Metal game, and a PSP game. Anyways, the voice acting in this game is pretty good. After all, it plays a big role in conveying the mood of the endings. They're on the same level of quality as the Twisted Metal 2 endings, so if you like those endings, they will also be right up your alley. Other than that, I don't have anything further to say about the sound department of Head On. Head On was ported to the PS2 in 2008, and it included a lot of extras. Included in this version are the live-action cutscenes that were supposed to be the first game's endings, concept art, a demo for Twisted Metal Lost, a video about the history of Twisted Metal, and a minigame called Sweet Tour. For a bit of background, Incognito was working on a successor to Twisted Metal Black, known as Harbor City, or Twisted Metal Black 2 as they refer to it as, but somewhere in the development, it was ultimately cancelled. Twisted Metal Lost is a beta version of the game, so it's rather unfinished, only has a few levels, and there's only 2 new characters, Goldtooth, which is a gold version of Sweet Tooth, and 12 Pack, a stock car driven by a headless driver known as Severed Sam. Its gameplay is identical to Black's. The other game is simply called Sweet Tour, and has players roaming around an asylum as Sweet Tooth, where they can read fun facts about the development of Twisted Metal 1, 2, Black, Head On, and Harbor City. The area itself is actually a cut part of gameplay that was supposed to be in Twisted Metal Harbor City. The developers wanted Harbor City to have missions where players would go on foot as Sweet Tooth and Preacher and explore areas such as the Asylum. The demo is what's left of the only mission they worked on before the game was cancelled. Apart from the extras, the Extra Twisted Edition also has a new map, Transylvania, a castle area where players can explore the royal building or go outside to escape the action. There's a lot of traps scattered throughout the castle, so be careful, or else there will be one less contestant in the battle. Alright, enough of the fun stuff, let's talk about the issues. The first issue I have is no new starting characters. As I mentioned before, there's only 3 new characters, and they're all bosses. Now, I know ATV is hardly what anybody would call a boss character, but if anything, it's even worse that way, because not only does he have to be unlocked, there's not much to his character anyway. He's literally just an ATV driver. Cousin Eddie is pretty much just a reskin of Minion, and for the 3rd time now, Powertooth is only playable on 1 level. I get Incognito wanted to bring back as many old characters as possible to make it really feel like the true successor to Twisted Metal 2, but if cutting an old character or 2 meant new faces could take their place, it would really improve the quality of this game. Don't get me wrong, I love the returning characters as much as the next guy, but it's nice to incorporate new characters to really increase the variety of usable vehicles and keep the series fresh and original. Secondly, the soundtrack. It's not like the music in this game doesn't feel appropriate, but I really wish we got that music that was more akin to the PS1 games. The rock songs of the PS1 games really knew what it took to pump players up, so that they really get into destroying their opponents and causing large amounts of destruction. I feel like this game really doesn't have the same energy in its songs. Not to mention, in the PS2 version, the game decides to play the following theme while fighting the final 2 bosses. Wow, thanks. Now I really feel motivated to win this competition. Last issue. Maybe it's just me, I wish this game wasn't as similar to Twisted Metal 1 and 2 as it is. I understand that Incognito wanted to make a game that felt like the first two games, considering how much people enjoyed them over, say, Twisted Metal 3, 4, or even Small Brawl. My issue with it is there feels to be an overabundance of borrowing things from those games that, quite honestly, there's not that much uniqueness in the characters or levels. We've already discussed the characters issue, and as for the levels, while they're great, about half of them are from places that were already in the first two games, and even share some of the same geography. There's also a few maps that have layouts similar to Black as well. It's not like these maps aren't unique or aren't fun to play on, it's just I would have liked to see more new layouts and new designs. Apart from that, I don't have any other issues with this game. Since Head-On took what was good about the first two games in Black, it's super fun, there's a good amount of stuff to unlock, and the overall vibe makes sense with the series. It does borrow heavily from the previous games, minus 989's contributions, and this, in my opinion, makes the game better and worse, because while it mostly borrows the good stuff, it left less room in the game for new ideas and content to flourish and freshen it up. The music makes sense with the levels, but don't really have that same energy previous soundtracks had. Regardless, let's count everything Head-On has to offer. 18 vehicles filled with new people and returning contestants, 10 levels very similar to Black, but have enough uniqueness to separate themselves from previous games, unlockables that are obtained by completing certain challenges in the tournament mode, endings in the same vein as the second game's endings, so they're clever and feel fulfilling, a soundtrack that's more focused on being atmospheric rather than uplifting and adrenaline pumping, combat that is pretty much Twisted Metal Black's engine, with some changes to accommodate for the PSP's limitations, and a lot of things returning from Twisted Metal Black. Head-On is still a really good game. Remember, this was for the PSP, so we had to hold it to a different standard because of the limitations of the portable system. And until next time, let the mayhem of the Twisted Metal contest continue.